Right. Let's get inside the tower and see what kind of resistance we're gonna have to deal with. Well, I certainly appreciate the idea the tank's distracting the enemy. This isn't the kind of game where that kind of tactic means much of anything. We have to contend with random encounters, not a coherent and organized force here. Ah, well, at least the enemies on the first floor are no different from the enemies just outside of the tower. I suppose that's a mercy. Lovely. We're getting a hammer, and I don't think anyone on this team can even equip one. Hell, I don't think it's even possible for Sid to ever enter this tower at all. So why did we casually find a weapon for him that he could have possibly bought back on the surface? Not that it's a big deal by any means, I'm just a little confused. Again, that paralysis really didn't mean much of anything there. And if I wasn't paying attention, I probably wouldn't have even noticed that it had happened. Really, why not have a more noticeable sign that the goblin had some specific status effect on him than just making his sprite slightly darker? I'm sure the ether could be more useful than the ice arrows, but then it's not like I really remember what kind of arrow that Rosa currently has equipped. All I know is that her arrows have a certain amount of ammo, then I'd need to enter the equipment screen and put another bunch of arrows in there. And while it's certainly a good idea to switch to more suitable arrows when looking at enemies you're facing, it's not like there's a convenient way to replenish those arrows in a dungeon like this. Either you stumble onto a chest that just happens to have some more arrows for her, which means it's not going to have anything that's useful for the other characters on the team, or you're just getting a fresh supply of, it's just, Again, the Pixel Remaster and the 3D Remake felt the need to remove the whole ammo thing for arrows in Final Fantasy IV. But I suppose it's interesting to go through this game with said ammo annoyance, if only to see how the game designers originally thought things up mechanically on that front. And with the sheer amount of experimentation and testing that Final Fantasy does over the decades, it's hard to really be all that annoyed when something doesn't quite manage to work out in practice. Storytelling is a bit tougher to be forgiving about. Especially because it's harder to say that the problems aren't evident on paper before you put them into practice. Somehow didn't feel like all that much experience points considering how far into the game we are, and good god, that was very little money to earn as well. I somehow doubt we're gonna do all that much leveling up before we get to the next major boss fight. Still, it's a safe guess that the next boss is gonna be the final elemental guy we haven't taken on yet, the one that represents fire. I'm sure that'll be a good time for Rydia to absolutely tear into one of these, bastards with ice. I'm certainly not gonna have her spend her NP all that much on random lizards on the way up or something, but I might send off a few spells, if only because her whip is kinda weak. The hell? An egg? Just how the hell did we manage to get ambushed by an egg? Those aren't exactly known for being especially mobile. And the egg hatched something that we're already reasonably familiar with killing in this place. Something we've taken on in much larger numbers than this. No clue what's going on here. And now we're ambushing something that just leaped out of a box to try to kill us. Doesn't really feel like things are making all that much sense out here at the moment, though apparently the gimmick for the security eye is that it spawns other enemies for us to fight against. it also has laser beams for some reason. Kind of feels a bit too sci-fi, all things considered, but then we've already got airships that are advanced enough to have an autopilot installed. The game designers just stepped back and tried to think of as many cool things as they could stuff into this game. Well, the Shimra is certainly doing a good amount of damage to us, that's for sure. Certainly more troublesome than anything else we've seen in this tower at the moment. I guess we'll just have to see how common it becomes as we keep climbing the tower. We still look like we're in good condition, but as usual, we have no clue how far away we are from the next save point. And much like the Tower of Zot, the Tower of Babel just feels way too sci-fi considering the technology and general aesthetic of every other location in the game. It's enough to make you wonder why Golbez hasn't been using flying saucers instead of the airships he stole from Baron, or why some of these soldiers are bothering with swords and shields to fight against us. Hell, Golbez himself looks dressed like he fits in this world instead of being some kind of alien Vader with high tech. Sure, it's Final Fantasy, it's not the first time they've pulled that kind of bullshit, but it still feels like something worth calling out. I swear, it shouldn't be that difficult to show the enemy having status effects. We'd certainly see the little green dots that denote being poisoned if the player got infected with it. I suppose the game designers felt that the player absolutely needs to know what statuses our team has on them at a given time so we can cure them, but it really shouldn't be tough to show that the enemy has something happening to them to help us with any tactics we might think over the course of a fight. Not that I'm all that tactical in the random encounters. I just pour as much damage as I can in a given fight, and occasionally bother to heal our team. And I barely change that all that much when I go to the boss fights. While there's certainly some troublesome moments in this game, it feels for the most part like I don't really need to think things through for the vast majority of the battles. And to be honest, that's kind of tempting me to get to Final Fantasy III after this game. Sure, I've already completed recording Final Fantasy V and loved every second of it. Whereas I've started, stopped, then restarted Final Fantasy III a few separate times at this point. Still, the story of this game had a number of absurd moments that just made me cringe at how forced some things are, and at how underutilized various characters and their dynamics are. And I'm pretty sure I'd certainly not get all that complacent when dealing with the enemies in Final Fantasy III, because some of the moments there are pretty bullshit, because they expect you to change your team composition pretty frequently. And there's also a lot less counterattacking in Final Fantasy III, not that we've seen a whole lot here recently. I'm just mentioning some game-long annoyances while we're still working our way up the tower and killing time. It's actually a rather relaxing climb, all things considered, and I don't think the Tower of Babel was supposed to come across as relaxing. The story is acting like it's supposed to be a big push against the villain and stop him before he manages to cause all hell to break loose. Two problems with that, though. For one thing, the game has already passed a point where all hell was supposed to break loose when Golbez gained the 4th crystal back when we were above ground. Instead, they just did an ass pull where it turns out there were another 4 crystals he needed to grab, 4 crystals that the game never hinted at before. I don't even need to double check how much footage is left in the game's playthrough to feel that this is definitely not the final dungeon. It doesn't feel anywhere near the sort of endgame that I remember from Final Fantasy I. For God's sakes, the tower has the exact same tile set as the other tower we had to climb. That really screams that the top isn't going to be all that final for us. The second is just how many times Golpez has managed to get victories that felt entirely unearned. When he kidnapped Rosa and took the crystal after that questionably done battle, where Kain backstabbed us and everybody just stood there. When his severed arm grabbed the crystal and teleported out and everybody just stood there. The fact that he gained 2 crystals before we even managed to get underground. Again, this game was a remarkable step forward in gaming history and all that, but there are just too many aspects of the storytelling that just have not aged well. I'll still eventually do the 3D remake of this game. They certainly change up a good number of things, and overall I do enjoy the experience, despite my issues with the stories, but I am in no rush to do so. Dear God, those arrows do little to nothing. I probably should have switched what kind of arrows we're shooting, but definitely not going to do any other Final Fantasies where there's an archer class and a limited number of arrows that you have to keep buying over the course of the game. It just makes archery feel so much less viable than it probably should be. It's that awkward thing where I can completely understand why arrows would be a limited resource and all that, but dear God, the very unpredictable encounter rate, the fact that the only other ranged tools are either Kain jumping and landing on his enemy's spear first, or just some magical attack, this game just isn't making the backline feel all that great. And this is a game where, with the exception of the absolute beginning before Rydia even joined our team, we have always had at least one person in the back. A game where on paper Rosa should be especially amazing to have. She is an absolutely great medic. The best you could possibly ask for, ready to heal all damage inflicted on us. She is always going to be on the back line, especially since she has less health than most of the other playable characters this far in, and there's no way she's getting the kind of armor that Kain and Cecile are. So the fact that her signature weapon is a bow and arrow should mean she's damn capable all the time. But I am in no hurry to switch her to stronger arrows we have at this point. I want to use up the weaker arrows before switching to the good stuff, since that might mean that the stronger arrows last us long enough to face more dangerous foes. It would be pretty awkward to run out of the actually good arrows before we run into the next boss fight, even if Rosa is better suited to healing than shooting anyway. It's just something that feels a bit awkward for me. Maybe not for other people, though. Yeah. Yang, Kain, and Cecile are hitting so hard that, frankly, Rosa and Rydia probably shouldn't be doing all that many physical attacks anyway. Not that they're actually doing that much when they do strike. Well, here's our save point. Good a time as any to take a break, at least in terms of this recording session, but it looks like I can fit in the next bit of raw footage into this clip without having to cut any footage, and still be under half an hour long. Part of me wants to be pleased that things are going to be that snappy in the next bit of raw footage. The other is a bit worried we're not going to see all that much that feels all that impactful in this clip. Partly because the bigger moments in the story have fallen pretty flat for me for quite a while in the game, and partly because, yeah, I doubt we are outright finishing the dungeon in around 8.5 minutes. Again, though, when we lose characters on our team, all too often it feels like they're trying too hard to bring the drama, and it's gotten to a point where it's hard to feel any emotion when they try to get dramatic. And when the bad guys win, it inevitably just feels as sure a thing to happen as frickin' Gravity. Their most legitimate wins feel like the ones where we were never there to stop them. Either because they gained the crystals off-screen, or because we just saw the tail end of their attacks with no way for the player to actually intercept them. All 3 times we fought them for the crystals, they gained the crystal due to complete and utter bullshit. Completely unearned, and our heroes come across as idiots for not doing more to prevent Golbez from, just gaining more momentum, if you can call it that. Every monster in a box is one of those floating eyes around here. Granted, the monsters they summon seem to be different each time, so I suppose that's a bit of a surprise. Still, I'm not a fan of the whole monster in a box thing. If they're gonna pull a Jack-in-the-Box joke like that, either have the box itself be a monster, or make the monster that comes out seem like something that could have actually genuinely come from inside of a box. Okay, so the previous dungeon was giving us fire-themed equipment, and this one is giving us ice-themed stuff. Good to know, since we're going to be fighting the Fire Elemental boss at some point. Why do I have the distinct feeling we're not gonna have a tough boss fight until the absolute final boss of the game? I'm pretty sure that Pygun was the most mechanically annoying boss to deal with and wasn't a bonus boss of some kind. I'm sure a bonus boss later on could be more frustrating, but we'll see. We also had the already cheap crap with the Dark Elf in the Magnetic Cave. We had Golbez ambushing us and knocking out 3 members of our team before we even had the chance to do anything immediately after another boss fight. There's not much more the enemy can do in terms of pure, unadulterated bullshit for a boss fight to really shift things in their favor. Sure, the stats for the enemies are going to keep on increasing as we keep making progress, and we're going to have to keep getting better and better equipment, but I just feel like we've gone through the harshest of bullshit already. Outside of the inevitable grind of the final dungeon and whatever boss fights there, I'm just feeling pretty relaxed right now. Part of me actually does hope that I pay for that and start paying more attention because things get dangerous. The other doesn't mind that things feel like they're unintentionally winding down after the crap we had to deal with to get this far. Given my opinion of the story, I feel like the game kinda should be getting ready to finish sometime soon. They just lost absolutely every bit of interest I had in the story when Golbez's severed hand grabbed the previous crystal before now. But hey, we already got this far in, so we can push on. What makes some ambushes switch around our formation and some don't? I'm trying to remember when Final Fantasy stopped doing this kind of gimmick for the occasional random encounters. Was it when they finally got to Final Fantasy X, the PlayStation 2 era of the series? Or did the series keep having the occasional back attack all the way until Final Fantasy XII, when it really started trying to experiment with things to a degree that it felt like they were just absolutely done bothering with turn-based in this franchise. Granted, the time bar thing that's in this game and will be a thing until Final Fantasy X is a step towards real-time without fully taking that step there. 10 felt like the last run of turn-based in this series. I'm definitely looking forward to getting to that one, but we've got plenty of games between now and then. I might be tempted to go back and forth, no particular order for 3, 5, 7, and 8, but 9 followed by 10 is definitely the way that's gonna go, with 12 after that. No clue if I'm ever gonna do 13 and its spin-offs, or 16, but I am most definitely, no argument, staying away from 15. I keep mentally bouncing back and forth between not wanting to touch anything after 12 and feeling like at least 13 and 16 have more coherent in-game stories than 15's. I mean, it's clear that this game, story-wise, is worse than I remembered, but even with that, I'm still willing to, at some point, do the remake of this game. As many improvements as a 3D remake will have over this, though, the story is not what's going to be improved, or at least not the story beats that I find the most obnoxious. Though, maybe the execution will be better? Though again, no clue when I'll get around to the remake of this one. We're certainly going through the floors at a good pace, or at least it feels like it. Though I have the distinct feeling we're gonna have to go back and forth around here a bit. Mostly because of that locked door on the previous floor, and this layout looks a little weird at the moment. Well, it certainly took longer than I expected for us to get to our next fight there. Shame that I'm running away the instant it starts, but for God's sakes, Rosa got knocked out before we were allowed to do anything there. There was literally nothing we could have done with the tools that we have to avoid that happening. Technically speaking, we could have kicked their asses in vengeance if I switched formation placement and just attacked with the physical members of the team, but it just doesn't feel worth it at that point. Not when they had that kind of starting advantage against us. I wouldn't mind losing our random chance advantage in random encounters if the enemy doesn't get that sort of thing either. The Persona games pull that sort of thing off in battles better, because it's something the player actively does. Do we hit the monster's dungeon sprite from behind for the advantage? Or do they get to hit us from behind by the monster for the disadvantage? Certainly feels less frustrating than leaving it to random chance. Anyway, it looks like I'm pulling back for another break. I suppose I could have kept going, but I just wasn't feeling it after that surprise Rosa knockout. I need to regain my bearings a bit, and thankfully we've got plenty of supplies to do that with.